So, esteemed members of the Imperial Council, you want to know what happened to our glorious invasion force? Fleet Commander Draz Vek paused, his forearms gesturing dramatically as the holographic displays around him showed the pitiful remnants of what was once the mightiest armada in the Traxian Empire. Well, grab your comfort tentacles and settle in. This is going to be uncomfortable. The 7 high counselors shifted uneasily on their floating platforms. Draz couldn't help but notice how their normally vibrant blue skin had paled to an anxious periwinkle. Good. They should be nervous. Let's start with some numbers, shall we? 9,900 ships, 30 million crew members, 6 billion units of weaponry. The largest invasion force ever assembled in the glorious 12,000-year history of our empire. Draz clicked his mandibles, the Traxian equivalent of a bitter laugh. And how many returned? 73 ships, barely 20,000 survivors. Most of them requiring extensive medical attention for what our psychologists are now calling Earth shock. Grand Council leader Morva leaned forward, her ceremonial headpiece wobbling precariously. Commander Vek, hey, we understand the losses were significant. What we need to know is how a pre-warp civilization managed to decimate our forces. Significant? Significant? Draz slammed one of his 4 hands onto the console, causing the holographic display to flicker. With all due respect, Grand Leader, calling our losses significant is like calling a supernova a bit warm. We lost 99.3% of our invasion force. The most catastrophic military disaster since ever. Draz took a breath, composing himself. He'd survived Earth, after all. He could survive this debriefing. You want to know what happened? Overconfidence happened. They're just primitive humans, you said. They still burn fossil fuels, you said. They spend most of their time creating amusing videos of their domestic animals, you said. Draz pointed accusingly at Intelligence Director Paxol, who suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. We sent 9,900 ships to conquer Earth, expecting them to surrender after the first orbital demonstration. A standard intimidation tactic that's worked on 100 worlds. Draz's voice dropped to a near whisper. Turns out, humans don't intimidate easily. And they definitely don't surrender. Draz activated his personal data projector, displaying the original intelligence briefing on Earth. The council members leaned forward, their eye stalks extending with interest. Here's what our extensive research told us about Earth, Draz said, making air quotes with his upper arms while his lower arms operated the controls. Humans, bipedal mammals, average lifespan 80 cycles, technological level, primitive spacefaring, mostly limited to their own moon. Military capability, fragmented and disorganized, with separate nation-states maintaining independent forces. Political structure, chaotic democracy, with frequent leadership changes. Threat assessment, minimal. Draz barked out a laugh that sounded like grinding metal. Oh, and my personal favorite psychological profile, prone to panic and quick surrender when faced with superior technology. Whoever wrote that should be launched into a black hole. The image shifted to show Grand Admiral Lumen, a decorated veteran with scales so polished they reflected like mirrors, addressing the pre-invasion war council. I remember Admiral Lumen's exact words, Draz continued, mimicking the Admiral's deep, pompous voice. This will be nothing more than a flashy parade with some fireworks at the end. We'll be home in time for the Galactic Alignment Festival. Draz paused. Admiral Lumen, of course, is now scattered across 3 different continents of Earth. Counselor Vexra raised a tentacle. Were there no dissenting opinions during planning? Just one. Draz nodded, bringing up the image of a slender, gray-skinned Traxian with unusually large eyes. Science officer Nera. She actually studied human history extensively and raised several concerns. These humans, she said, have a peculiar habit of uniting against external threats. They fight constantly among themselves, but the moment an outsider threatens them, Draz shook his head. Admiral Lumen cut her off, laughing. called her overly cautious and lacking military understanding. The display changed to show the massive invasion fleet in orbit around Traxia Prime. The sheer scale was breathtaking, ships stretching beyond visual range, gleaming with technology thousands of years more advanced than Earth's. We prepared everything. Atmosphere processors to optimize the planet for Traxian physiology, slave collars by the billions, cultural reprogramming centers. We even brought architects to design our new vacation homes on their scenic beaches. Draz's voice dripped with self-disgust. Our ships could travel faster than light. Their fastest vehicles couldn't even escape their atmosphere efficiently. Our weapons could vaporize mountains. Their weapons used chemical propellants and crude explosives. Our soldiers wore adaptive armor. Their soldiers wore fabric. Draz's eyes narrowed. We were so certain of our superiority that we didn't even bother with proper reconnaissance. Because why would we need it? They were just humans, after all. Our arrival in Earth's solar system was meant to be our crowning moment of glory. Draz continued, his voice flat as the holographic display showed the massive Traxian fleet emerging from hyperspace. We positioned ourselves behind their moon for the dramatic reveal. Admiral Lumen even composed a special victory anthem to play over all Earth broadcast channels once we appeared. He had quite the flair for theatrics. Draz paused, his upper right hand rubbing the scar tissue where his lower left arm used to be. First sign something was wrong. Complete silence. No panic transmissions. No desperate pleas. No world leaders trying to contact us. Just silence. He clicked his mandibles together nervously. Then Lieutenant Korax, our communications specialist, picked up something odd. Encrypted transmissions bouncing between every continent on the planet. Massive data packets. At the time, we thought they were sharing cat videos or whatever humans do when they're scared. The display shifted to show Earth from orbit, appearing peaceful and blue. We sent the first wave forward. 3,000 ships, standard intimidation formation. Admiral Lumen wanted to block out their sun as we approached. Draz laughed humorlessly. That's when Earth showed us their first little surprise. The hologram suddenly erupted with bright flashes as objects rose from Earth at incredible speeds. Hundreds of orbital defense platforms, completely undetectable until activated. Weapons technology they definitely shouldn't have had. Draz's voice grew tight. The official report says we lost 412 ships in the first 6 minutes. That's a lie. We lost 847 ships in the first 3 minutes. Several council members gasped. One actually fell off their floating platform. Oh, but that was just the appetizer, Draz continued, almost enjoying their discomfort now. Remember those encrypted transmissions? Turns out the humans were coordinating a global military response. Nations that our intelligence said hated each other and would never cooperate. They were working together like they'd been doing it for centuries. The display showed multiple angles of the battle, Traxian ships being systematically targeted and destroyed by Earth defenses. We intercepted some of their communications. Their military leaders actually sounded happy. They were laughing as they fought us. One human commander, I think they called him General Blackwell, actually said, and I quote, "We've been preparing for this day since their scout ships crashed in the 1950s. Thank you for the technology, you overgrown grasshoppers." Draz looked physically ill at the memory. Turns out those weather balloon crashes and swamp gas incidents our reconnaissance had dismissed. The humans had recovered some of our earlier exploration vessels. They'd been reverse engineering our technology for decades, keeping it secret, waiting for us to show up. The display showed the second wave of the Traxian fleet moving forward to engage. Admiral Lumen refused to believe what was happening. He ordered the second wave to push through, thinking Earth had simply gotten lucky with their first volley. Draz shook his head. That's when their moon opened up. The hologram showed a massive section of the lunar surface sliding away, revealing an enormous cannon. They hollowed out part of their moon and turned it into a weapon. A moon cannon. Who does that? Draz was practically shouting now. The energy signature was off our measurable scales. The blast cut through our fleet like it was made of vapor. 2,000 ships gone in a single shot. Draz took a moment to compose himself. And during all this, you know what the humans were doing on the ground? Having parties, celebrations. They were broadcasting everything lived to their populations, cheering each time one of our ships exploded. Their social media, that's their global communication network, crashed from too many people posting victory. Memes. He looked at each council member in turn. They weren't afraid of us. They were excited to fight us. Despite losing nearly half our fleet in orbit, Admiral Lumen insisted we proceed with ground operations. Draz said, his voice heavy with remembered frustration. His exact words were, "We still outnumber them 10-1 in troops. Once we're on the ground, their orbital advantages mean nothing." Draz manipulated the controls, showing landing operations across Earth's surface, Africa, Asia, North America, Europe. We deployed ground forces in 12 strategic locations simultaneously. Our plan was to establish forward bases, then expand outward until we controlled all major population centers. Draz clicked a button, zooming in on a landing zone in what the display labeled as Amazon rainforest. First problem? Earth itself tried to kill us. Our environmental analysts apparently skipped a few details. Draz's tone turned acidic. For instance, they failed to mention that Earth has millions of poisonous life forms, tiny insects that can kill with a single bite, plants that cause excruciating rashes on contact, microscopic organisms that infiltrate breathing apparatus. Battalion leader Trux landed his forces in something called a swamp and lost 300 soldiers to the environment before encountering a single human. The display shifted to show Traxian soldiers struggling through dense jungle, their advanced armor covered in vines and mud. Our technology, designed for optimal efficiency in controlled environments, malfunctioned constantly. Humidity fried circuitry. Extreme temperature fluctuations caused weapon misfires. Sand, yes. Simple sand damaged joint servos in our battle suits. You have no idea how much sand there is on Earth. It's everywhere. Draz switched to urban combat footage, Traxian forces moving through a city, facing surprising resistance. When we did engage humans directly, they fought. Draz seemed to search for the right words. They fought wrong. They didn't follow any recognizable military doctrine. No formal lines, no predictable formations. They'd retreat, then ambush, surrender, then attack when our guards were down. Use primitive projectile weapons one moment, then improvised explosives the next. The display showed humans in civilian clothing throwing peculiar objects at Traxian troops. They made weapons out of everything. Everything. Cooking fuel, gardening tools, or public transportation. One human settlement converted their waste treatment facility into a trap that drowned an entire battalion in something I refused to name in polite company. Draz's mandibles twitched in what might have been grudging respect. And their warrior types? Completely unpredictable. In the eastern region they call Russia, our forces encountered elderly humans, well past their prime fighting years by any reasonable standard, who fought with the ferocity of elite commandos. In the American territories, untrained civilians with personal weapons inflicted casualties comparable to specialized military units. The hologram shifted to a global view with dozens of red dots representing Traxian battalions. 26 hours into the ground assault, we began losing contact with battalion leaders. One after another, communication channels went silent. At first, we assumed it was equipment failure due to environmental conditions. Draz gave a bitter laugh. Then we intercepted human broadcasts celebrating the deaths of our commanders. He pulled up footage of humans dragging Traxian officer armor through streets, cheering crowds following behind. They specifically targeted our leadership. And they knew exactly how to identify our command structures, communication relays, and supply chains. It was as if they had studied our military protocols for years. Draz paused, which, as we later discovered, they had been doing since they captured our scout ship pilots. Draz brought up an image of a captured Traxian scout, preserved in what appeared to be a human research facility. Those missing explorers we wrote off as lost to space anomalies. The humans had them, studied them, learned our weaknesses. When battalion leader Pax tried to regroup his forces in a region called Australia, the locals simply released something called cassowaries, apparently some kind of demon bird, into our camp. The resulting chaos allowed human snipers to eliminate every officer above squad level. Draz looked directly at the defense minister. By the 40-hour mark, we had lost contact with 60% of our ground forces. The remaining 40% were reporting the same message, unable to hold position, requesting immediate extraction. But extraction was impossible because our orbital forces were still being decimated by that cursed moon cannon. The 50-hour mark of our invasion is when everything truly fell apart, Draz said, his voice dropping to near a whisper. Our remaining ships in orbit received a transmission that appeared to come from Admiral Lumen himself, ordering all vessels to converge on a specific set of coordinates for a final decisive strike. 300 ships responded immediately. Draz's hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the controls to show the footage. It was a trap. The coordinates led directly into the firing path of that moon cannon. The transmission wasn't from Lumen at all. Draz looked up, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic carnage. The humans had hacked our supposedly unhackable communication systems. They weren't just mimicking our encryption. They were using our own command authorization codes. A council member's voice wavered. How is that possible? Because... Draz replied grimly. They'd captured one of our communication officers alive 3 hours earlier. Instead of crude torture, they simply showed him something called cat videos for 2 straight hours until he voluntarily gave them everything they wanted. We still don't understand the psychological weapon these cat videos represent. The display shifted to various locations around Earth, showing strange devices being deployed by human military forces. At the same time, Earth nations began rolling out experimental weapons we had no defense against. The Chinese military deployed sonic disruptors that specifically targeted our auditory sensitivity. European forces used electromagnetic pulse weapons calibrated precisely to the frequency of our neural implants. A nation called Japan unleashed autonomous combat robots that could predict our tactical algorithms better than we could. Draz pressed a sequence of buttons, bringing up battlefield footage from multiple fronts. What truly broke us wasn't their technology, though. It was their spirit. Draz seemed uncomfortable with the word. We'd capture a human settlement, thinking we'd broken their resistance, only to face twice as many fighters the next day. We'd destroy their supply lines, and they'd create new ones overnight. Cut their communications, they'd use smoke signals. They'd demolish their infrastructure. They'd fight from the rubble. The display showed humans of all ages participating in the resistance, elderly creating makeshift weapons, children serving as lookouts, ordinary citizens transforming everyday locations into fortified positions. One human commander we captured explained it to me quite simply. She said, "Aliens have been trying to conquer Earth in our fiction for centuries. We've been mentally preparing for this our entire cultural history." Draz's mandibles clicked in what might have been respect. They'd been rehearsing this war in their imagination long before we arrived. The hologram shifted to a global map showing Traxian positions rapidly diminishing. Within 60 hours, we had lost every major strategic position. The human resistance wasn't just pushing us back, they were systematically exterminating our forces, not taking prisoners, not accepting surrenders, just erasing us from their planet with terrifying efficiency. Draz zoomed in on footage of his own command ship, surrounded by debris from fallen Traxian vessels. Or by the 70th hour, our command structure had collapsed entirely. Admiral Lumen was confirmed dead after his flagship attempted to retreat through the asteroid belt and was ambushed by human fighters hiding there. Science Officer Nira and I found ourselves the highest-ranking officers still alive, in command of the pitiful remainder of what had been our glorious invasion force. Draz's voice hardened. That's when we had to make the decision that brings me before you today: complete withdrawal or complete annihilation. There was no middle ground left. Our retreat was not the organized withdrawal of a disciplined military force, Draz said, his voice hollow. It was a desperate scramble for survival, every ship for itself, no formation, no coordination, just blind panic. The holographic display showed Traxian vessels attempting to flee Earth orbit, many exploding before they could reach safe distance. The humans weren't content to simply repel us. They wanted to make sure we'd never return. Their orbital platforms targeted our engines specifically, not to destroy us outright, but to cripple us, leave us drifting, dying slowly. Draz's upper hands clenched into fists. They were sending a message to whoever might find our remains. The display zoomed in on Draz's flagship, the inevitable Conquest, surrounded by human interceptors and larger attack vessels. My own ship was completely encircled. Science Officer Nira calculated our survival chances at 0.34%. Draz activated another recording showing the bridge of his vessel, crew members frantically working at stations amid explosions and alarms. That's when Nira suggested something so outrageously against protocol that I nearly had her arrested on the spot. She proposed we divert all power from life support, weapons, and shields to the main engines for 12 seconds, just enough time to reach escape velocity. Draz clicked his mandibles at the memory. It meant certain death for approximately 40% of the crew in the lower decks. It meant flying completely defenseless through a gauntlet of human weapons fire. The footage showed Draz making the call, giving the order that condemned hundreds of his crew to death. It worked, he said simply as the display showed his ship breaking through the blockade, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. Barely. We lost 2 of our 6 engine cores, hull breaches on 17 decks. But we broke free. 62 other ships managed to follow our trajectory before the humans closed the gap. The hologram shifted to a view of Earth from just beyond lunar orbit, growing smaller as the fleeing ships accelerated away. That final view of Earth, Draz paused, seeming to struggle with the memory. The blue planet growing distant in our viewers. Science Officer Nira recorded one last transmission from the humans as we fled. It wasn't a threat or a warning. It was laughter, broadcast on all our frequencies, just laughter. Draz straightened, composing himself. The journey home took 19 days, 19 days of counting our losses, 19 days of tending to the wounded with inadequate medical supplies, 19 days of preparation for this moment, standing before you to report a failure so complete it defies comprehension. The display showed the final tally: 9,827 ships destroyed, 29,980,000 personnel lost, trillions in military assets abandoned or destroyed. The shame of our return was perhaps worse than the defeat itself, Draz said quietly. The faces at the spaceport when just 73 ships limped home instead of the victorious armada they expected. The knowledge that each of us survivors represented hundreds of thousands who would never return. The questions from families that we couldn't bear to answer. Draz straightened to his full height, looking each council member directly in their eyes before speaking his final words. Honored Council, I stand before you not just to report a military catastrophe, but to deliver a warning that the very future of our empire may depend upon. His voice had lost its earlier bitter edge, replaced by something more somber, more urgent. Humanity is not what we thought. They are not primitive. They are not simple. They are not predictable. What they lack in technological advancement, they make up for with adaptability, creativity, and a frankly disturbing enthusiasm for violence. Draz activated one final display, a montage of human warfare throughout their history. These creatures have spent their entire existence fighting against nature, against each other, against their own limitations. They have turned warfare into an art form, defeat into motivation, and adversity into advantage. In the span of a single century, they went from primitive flying machines to spacecraft, from simple radio to global instantaneous communication, from basic computing to artificial intelligence. The council chamber had gone deathly quiet. Science officer Nera, who correctly predicted much of what happened, has prepared a comprehensive report on humanity with one central recommendation: leave them alone. Draz emphasized each word with a sharp gesture. Not for a decade. Not for a century. Perhaps not ever. Grand Council leader Morva leaned forward. You suggest we simply ignore a habitable world? Pretend this defeat never happened? Allow these primitives to potentially develop further and one day threaten us? Draz's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. With respect, Grand Leader, they already threaten us. Our invasion taught them precisely where to find us. And if there's one trait humans possess in abundance, it's a remarkable capacity to hold a grudge. He gestured to the holographic display showing Earth one final time. We thought ourselves advanced because our technology surpassed theirs by millennia. Yet they defeated us using our own tools against us, communicating through systems we thought impenetrable, fighting with a savagery we thought long evolved past. Draz's voice took on a philosophical tone. Perhaps true advancement isn't measured by technology at all, but by hunger. Hunger to survive. Hunger to adapt. Hunger to overcome. By that measure, humans may be the most advanced species we've ever encountered. Draz began to shut down his presentation, then paused with one final thought. Next time, instead of sending 9,900 warships, might I suggest we simply send them a greeting card? Something tasteful that says, sorry about the probes and the abductions. Please don't come looking for us. It would be considerably cheaper and, based on recent evidence, far more likely to succeed.